In English, that means hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Pallas. I'm a Bear Clan Mohawk from Oshawa with roots in Tyendinaga.
Hello and good morning, everyone. I'm Tammy Raycraft. We would like to welcome everyone to this year's Social Justice Week keynote with Dr. Iryna Starovoyt, who is joining us today from Ukraine, a country that has been dealing with Russian aggression since the 2014 annexing of Crimea.
We are incredibly lucky to have such a talented academic join us today to discuss the dire situation in Ukraine. We're also joined by first-year journalism student Andre Spence, who will be conducting this year's interview, as well as journalism and creative writing student Brendan Robbins Melrose, who will read our land acknowledgement.
We ask everyone here in attendance to please keep your microphones off during the interview. Brendan, over to you.
Hello, I'm Brendan. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Durham College is situated on the traditional lands of the First Peoples of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. These lands are covered under the Williams Treaties and rest within the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who care for and, through the treaty process, share the lands on which we live, learn, and teach. And I would like to acknowledge that the Crimea and Donbass regions are Ukrainian land, regardless of Russian occupation. Now, I will throw to Andre.
Hi, my name is Andre Spence. I'm a first-year journalism student, and I'm happy to be here to do the introduction and to take part in the discussion. Receiving a key to the city is an accomplishment that not everyone gets in their lifetime. It showcases the importance of that person and that they've made a positive impact in one way or another. This is especially apparent for Dr. Iryna Starovoyt, who received Lviv's key to the city in 2018. Starovoyt is a poet, essayist, and associate professor of cultural studies at the Ukrainian Catholic University. She's also authored 3 volumes of poetry, one of which being A Field of Foundlings. This book received English translation by the Lost Horse Press, opening the gate of Ukrainian poetry for English readers. So now we're going to move on to questions. And Iryna, we just want to ask, how are you doing?
Thank you for asking. Good morning, good day, everyone. It's an honor and a big pleasure to speak to you from Lviv, from Ukraine today. We are after the dusk here, and it's really a very good thing that electric power is back. And probably you know that electric grid is so damaged now in Ukraine that we only get 4 to 5 hours of electricity per 24 hours. We are 11 months into the full-scale invasion, but the war itself started with annexation of Crimea, and it's almost 9 years ago. So if you ask me about myself, I can say, well, at least 1/4 of my current life has been spent during the war. And if you ask my students, half of their lives, for many of them, has been spent during the war. But of course, these last 11 months, they were probably the most harmful and the most shocking experience for many, many of us, but also for our neighbors, also to our friends, and also to people all around the globe who somehow can switch to their smartphones and actually witness this war almost in the real time. So I might say that this war, which is Russian-Ukrainian war, is also in a way the first global war, the first war in which everybody who has a connection and everybody who has an interest in actually can witness. And this changes the situation. Not only we Ukrainians are affected and traumatized by the events, but I believe people in Canada and people in many other places around the globe are equally involved and equally traumatized. When you ask me about how Ukrainians feel almost a year into this full-fledged, full-scale war, well, in many ways we are shocked, we are in grief, but in other ways we also are very defiant against it, and we proudly say that we will survive. Our enemies wanted that by now neither Ukraine nor Ukrainian culture exists, but we still are here, and I'm still speaking to you. And there are people in the audience to whom I can speak in Ukrainian as well.
Okay, it's really impactful. I just want to ask a follow-up on one of the things you said, is that you said that this war, everyone has access to and everyone's able to see it. I just want to know what news networks can do to assess the situation properly and provide more knowledge, because a lot of news networks only talk about the big military stuff and doesn't talk about the personal issues that Ukrainians are going through in their day-to-day life.
Well, one thing I want to mention is that there is fate and there is life. In a way, Ukrainians have now to live through war, and this is fate. We could not somehow undo this. We could not just wake up another day from the bad dream and be in other life situation. But at the same time, the fate is not all the situation, all the circumstances which are given, because in your life, you actually make some decisions and you have influence on some aspects. And this is important. As we know now, this is really very important because the fate produces misfortune, but the life produces justice or injustice. And on this, you actually have your say. You can act upon this. When you imagine how to uphold the rights during the war, when so many people are oppressed, misplaced, when they are stripped from the right to peace, when they are stripped from the right to home, to security, to some basic things in their life. Of course, all this is very tragic, and you wouldn't wish to repeat these circumstances in any part of the world, in any foreseeable future. But at the same time, nothing has really happened until it has been recorded. And because of that, it is important that this work of recording, the work of reflection, the work of mediation is going on and on and on. If we think about what actually is happening, the life is happening. I call it life underwater. There is war, and this war is like a very unfriendly water around you, but you dive in and you still try to keep the life going and keep your head a little bit above the water. And if you are lucky enough to have some resources, you also help others to keep their heads a little bit above this water. And it's probably most important. Oh, sorry. Something has happened already with my connection. Can you see and can you hear me?
We're all good.
Yeah, I hope it was just temporarily. If something very wrong happened, then I will disconnect for a couple of minutes. I will run down to the basement and I will try to replug from there.
Okay.
So as you see, yes, there are all kinds of obstacles. There are all kinds of abnormal things happening. But I believe the most important thing is to preserve, to keep going with these small islands of normality, which are still there. Like in the first days of this big war, we disconnected from the university teaching. We asked our students, please solve the major problem of your life, reconnect with your family, with your close ones, and try to get some safety as much as it is possible. Some people were fleeing the country, some people were fleeing the most dangerous places, and so on. But after a couple of days, we started to get messages from our students, and they wanted to be helpful. They wanted to volunteer. They wanted to do something in collective effort to withstand to this aggression. And we started a couple of projects, and after less than a month, we were asked by the students, shouldn't we come back to the classes online, at least half of the schedule, at least half of the lectures and seminars which were planned for this semester, because it's good to have some harmonogram. It's good to have some schedule. It gives you a little bit of the illusion of control, that you know what will happen tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and it helps you to distinguish Monday from Friday, which is also very hard too when the war is raging outside and inside of people's lives.
Right, of course. I find that's very powerful to hear, considering the students, they wanted to help right away. It's something that I find that's really important for a characteristic, and shows the power of the Ukrainian people and like the power that they have. I also wanted to add a question about that. You said a lot of people are having difficulty with their day-to-day life and just normal obstacles that become normalities. I just want to ask if it's affected any of your colleagues in any specific ways where it's been particularly difficult.
It's always hard to start to talk about this because this is probably the most harmful part. The war comes closer and closer when your very dear start to disappear, when they are called to the war, when they join the army or the territorial defense, when they start to be ill because of the war, and nobody stopped mental illnesses and other illnesses during the war, and sometimes it's a very heavy burden to withstand. And it is important also to understand that not all people are of heroic kind. Not all of them can prove their teaching, let's say. Many of us, we are thinking, oh, I can do this or that when the time comes, but it's not that everybody actually can. And I believe the deepest sorrow and grief comes to me when the people from my community or from my circle of friends also give last tribute to one of us. This or that day, this or that week, we have funerals and funerals and funerals. And the war started with 2 funerals of my students. And just recently, like a couple of weeks ago, we got a very bad news from the front line that a dear and close colleague of us, my colleague from the Center for the Humanity at Lviv University, Ivan Hulevich, actually has been shot in action, and his body still is not retrieved. So we are waiting for him to get a proper funeral.
Right.
He was a brilliant translator, a very good colleague, and a very intelligent person with a great erudition, translating academic works from Spanish and English, and will be missed here for very, very long.
I'm really sorry to hear that. It's hard to hear. It's showcases the trauma that war can have on a community and how it impacts everyone. I just want to know if there's any other situations you'd like to particularly talk about during the invasion.
Well, I'm speaking from a place which has been hit by missiles almost regularly, and we had this feeling that we are the target for Russian troops since the very first hours of this war. And for many people also, there have been some plan to flee, to emigrate, to do something. But it's interesting to say that only probably 20 to 25% of my colleagues of these cultural circles of Lviv and of academic circles of Lviv actually emigrated. Many decided to stay right away, as long as it will be possible, and even if it will be impossible. And the same has happened to my friends in Kyiv, which has been in much more dire situation from the first hours of bombing. And the same happened to many of my friends in Kharkiv, which was almost under the siege, and it was undefined situation for more than half a year, whether Kharkiv will remain within Ukrainian control or whether it will be taken by Russian troops. And I believe that these life decisions and these, again, I will mention the cycles of support and resilience, they were really, really important. And I believe that one of the important dimension of culture is networking. Many people in culture, they were traveling more within the country. They were having collaboration across cities, across regions, and they just knew people in other places, and they had people to whom they can trust. 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, actually, we have been having a special event here in Lviv, which we called Biennale of Trust. Because in the group of interested activists, we were trying to detect what is the concept or what is a dimension of social and cultural life which is most damaged by the post-Soviet and post-imperial legacy. And we come to the conclusion that actually trust has been damaged heavily, that there is no presumption of trust in our society, that people tend to disbelieve, and then you have to prove who you are, and then probably they will start to believe you and to trust you. And it never comes as a default that you are somebody, you are a human being, I'm a human being, you are professional, I'm professional, you have good intentions, I have good intentions, probably we do something together. And this Biennale of Trust has been intended to be biennial, but actually pandemic has interfered with that, and the second thing never happened. But the first one was created in such a way that there was an academic level of it, when people were talking about their research on trust and certain case studies. There was the level of urban cooperation between different cities, including some cities from abroad, where city planners, city activists, city administrators were trying to imagine how they can actually influence that the whole social and cultural texture of the city will be more open and more trustful by the city dwellers and by the newcomers and by tourists and visitors. And the third level was artistic level. We have announced the competition for best posters on the topic of trust and distrust. And we got as much as 500 entries from more than 40 countries, from 3 continents. And it was really an important visual dimension of this. And how was it important for me, how it was healing for me to see the posters in the first months of this big war, the posters which we are saying the country is running on trust. So the whole country actually now had no more resources, physical or psychological or economical, than those who start with trust and end with trust. The whole volunteering networks, which very often were have to be built on the existing professional network, cultural networks between different places in Ukraine, they all were running on trust. And it was very important that this trust would not be destroyed, would not be damaged by bad intentions.
Of course. We do have a question in the chat for you. They want to know if you can speak on the source of Ukrainian courage and resilience, sociological and historical.
Well, I think long books will be written about this later. And I don't think there is just one answer, and the more so one brief answer about this. But probably this is a proper time to show the small video I have prepared for you, and then a small project done by a group of cultural practitioners who were working with me during October and November, within an initiative on lifelong learning, where our topic was cultural resilience, the formula, the resources for cultural resilience. So please join me for short video piece and then for some comments. I'm afraid that the video is muted. We don't hear the voice, the sound.
Okay.
And I will comment just briefly on that, but the whole idea which I want to address is this idea that resilience doesn't come from nowhere, but very often resilience rises in power when the risk, the threat is going up and up and up. And with this full-scale invasion, you really felt it from the first weeks that the stakes are going up and up. And at the same time, the human dimension of all this is going down and down. You saw some ruins of universities, of residential buildings, of sports and medical centers. I've been to these places. These are not just something alien to me. These come from Kharkiv region, Kiev region, Chernihiv region, and Kherson region. And I know people who were building these institutions at the sport, who were trying to fill them with new life, new energy, new ideas. And of course, now all this is mainly damaged or destroyed or gone. But at the same time, we also have to take into account that culture very often is destined to rebuild on its ruins. And Ukraine now, and Ukrainian culture now, is exactly in this, in a way, ancient Greek tragedy situation. We have to rebuild on our own ruins, and we have to treat these ruins as fundaments, as basics. And I believe they are also very solid basics. This parallel montage, which juxtapose all these damaged monuments and pieces of human life and all these signs of cruel destruction, with a small boy, 8 years old boy, playing his small reed pipe, and going on and on during the time in the bomb shelter, during his travel to Polish city abroad for a couple of weeks to stay safe, and then coming back to his musical school and having this closing event for the autumn semester, where people are present, and after the air raid, they are still having music. They still play music and listen to it. And it also gives you this feeling that culture goes on, especially this portable, low-key culture, when it's not a big forte piano, but just a small reed pipe, which can somehow keep on and create music, whatever comes. And I also wanted to think about these dimensions of justice and injustice, because the line in which I'm speaking, the week to which the event actually is assigned, is this Justice Week at your respected university and college. And I want just to remind you that exactly on this day, January 24, 8 years ago, 2015, Russian missile hit multi-storied residential building in Mariupol. That was the beginning of the destruction of Mariupol, the city of almost 500,000 residents, which now is actually only the ruins. There is no normal civilization there anymore. There are no prerequisites for urban life anymore. But it happened then. 31 people died, 117 people were injured, and it even didn't made its way to international news so much, because it was just an accident. It was just one episode, which was not so visible, not so important, not so much heard. And when we think about justice, I would also like to address this very important understanding that Ukraine, of course, was not an ideal country. None country is ideal anywhere in the history, anywhere in the now. But there was some notion of justice prior to the war, and we were trying to fight for it. There is some notion of justice and profound injustice during the war, and we know what it is. I will try to comment on that. And we would like to have the dream, the ideal of justice after the war. And we know that the way there comes through the transitional justice, the imperfect justice, the justice which has many faces and is prone to many compromises. But what is really important, that we would not get rid of the notion of justice at all, because we know that all the situation is so cynical and so barbarian. So when we think about justice, it is important to give the victim the voice, the full weight of the voice, because it's really very easy somehow to withdraw from the sense of injustice when injustice is penetrating every level, every dimension of the everyday. And we always call injustice deliberate acts of cruelty or deliberate acts of unfairness. And because of that, we also have to understand that justice and injustice, they are not in the air. These are acts of human beings to other human beings, of social institutions run by human beings to other people, to other groups of people, sometimes to other nations. So what could make them even worse if the injustice is already there? I believe it's deliberate indifference to such acts. When the injustice is happening and we on the top of that are indifferent and do nothing about it, then I think the situation is close to desperate. When still there are people locally and globally who do not obey, who say, no, it could not be like that, I disagree and I act against this, I believe then justice has a chance, justice has the hope to be rebuilt.
On the ship?
Right. Of course, it's difficult. I also just have another question in the chat.
Yep.
So it's Ukrainian culture is very powerful, is a very powerful force for healing. Ukraine will need the world's help to rebuild. Can you please speak to what is happening now in Ukraine, the genocide, and how to bring perpetrators to justice?
Yes, I believe perpetrators to justice should be the main slogan during the war and after the war, because this is a very heartbreaking question for me, how this war will actually end. I could bravely say that Russia has lost this war in many ways. At least their strategic and even tactical aims are not fulfilled. They fell on many directions, and they fell inside the country and outside the country, and more than anything, they have damaged Ukrainian-Russian collaboration and friendship, which has been there for decades. Nevertheless, there were signs of major injustices on the side of Russians against Ukrainians historically. Ukrainians were not very much thinking about this and not very much discussing and remembering that. Now it all will come back in a way, and it will be a dramatic comeback. But another thing is that crime, many historical crimes of big scale in my region, in the region from where I come, went almost unpunished or unpunished. And the Soviet Union, which is remembered in many ways around the globe, very little is remembered as a major faking institution, which was faking the memory of the tragic and criminal events of the past. So actually, even if we know now about all kinds of Stalin repressive machine and Stalinism as ideology, which caused many millions of people not only to perish, but also many millions of people to become perpetrators and to become included in the spiral of violence, when one day you can be a victim, but the next day or the next week you yourself could be a perpetrator as well. So actually it was so damaging to all moral profiles of the human societies and human beings individually. So it never has been punished. When Hitler and Hitlerism, Hitler and Nazism, when other European dictators very often were in a way called to justice, and there were special tribunals against them, and there were henchmen who were forced to to reply for everything they have done. And we know that some of them were rejecting the guilt. They were feeling themselves unguilty. But the whole situation internationally with international law was a situation to call them to justice and to take the situation to control in a way that it never will repeat. And I believe the structure of international cooperation and international security in Europe and beyond Europe after 1945 in many ways was built on this hidden or openly repeated slogan, never again. In the Russian-Ukrainian war, we see that genocidal intention and genocidal deeds are open and they are going on mass scale. We even don't know how many children, for example, have been internated, have been deported inside inland Russia. We don't know the fate of many, many Ukrainians who were caught in this big war in the south of the country. We know that by now there are about 20,000 civilians who are casualties of this big scale war, but we don't know exactly how many are has been disappeared. We know that 7 million of people were internally displaced and 7 million of people were externally displaced. They have become temporary refugees. And we also know that this drastic moment in human history has been treated with big empathy and big understanding and immediate action from the neighboring countries and other countries within Europe and even beyond Europe, because we know that Canada and the US and Great Britain, they all received Ukrainian refugees for within 100,000 of them, right? And somehow you support them and sustain them and try to help in this dire situation. We know about 3.5 million of Ukrainians which now are homeless. This war made them homeless. And it will not be undone by the plain tribunal held in The Hague or somewhere else. There should be not only the juridical process itself, but also reparation process and the process of rebuilding. And I believe only then we in Ukraine can expect that some sense of normality and some sense of justice will be actually restored. But even within Ukraine, what I'm afraid of is the level of dramatization and different level of suffering, which has been inflicted randomly on different places and different people. Like whether Ukrainians, which were under occupation for a couple of months, will understand those who were not. Whether Ukrainians, which were under occupation for 8.5, 9 years by now, will understand those who were not, or who were just temporarily for half a year. What are the level of collaborationism? What are the level of conformism? What are the level of of strategies of survival in all these very dire situations? And the same thing will happen probably between those Ukrainians who stayed and those Ukrainians who fled in very first days of the big war, because some of them would say, well, we were abandoned, we were we were given in the circumstances where we almost could not have any control on our own lives, and we depend on good people of goodwill, and it's not the best you can do when you are an adult. And those who stayed would say, well, but you have been in more privileged positions. You have not been under sirens, you haven't been under missiles, you haven't been under blackouts, you haven't been in the cold and the dark as we were for the whole this big year.
Of course. To connect to one of the points you said, good people, goodwill, one person wants to know if there's any ways on which Canadian students can offer support to Ukrainian students in some sort?
Oh, I think there are many ways actually, and because we are now more or less connected and interconnected through social media, through online platforms, we can be in touch. I believe that just being together, listening to each other, that trying to create some small projects or probably supporting some volunteering acts which are ongoing here in Ukraine, this will be of great help. And it is, as much as I understand also on my part and on part of what I see among my students, we just want from time to time to communicate with the world, and we want to be able to answer questions or spread the word or explain certain things which probably are not that visible or not that well understood outside of Ukraine. And yes, and I believe the best thing is when you make friendship. I can't imagine that Ukraine would survive if, of course, history has no if, but if Russia would decide to invade Ukraine back in 1991, when the Declaration of Independence has been supported by 92% of votes during the referendum on December 1st, 1991. Then Ukraine was a known place. And because of the Iron Curtain, actually almost nobody knew about us, and almost nobody knew us across the Iron Curtain. So nobody would be ready to help. We were too invisible and too muted for very, very long time. And now within these 30 years, something really important happened, that Ukrainians were traveling abroad, many of them, that international visitors were traveling to Ukraine, many of them, and there were friendships and there were collaborations, and all these networks, they proved to be tremendously important in the first days and weeks of this war, and even prior this full-scale invasion, because I believe those people who were inside Ukraine, they had less they were less prone to Russian propaganda or to all kind of misinformation, or the questions like, oh, maybe this is very complicated, maybe this is this way and maybe this is that way. There is more than one truth here.
Of course. Another person would like to know that, oh, sorry, they said earlier you said nothing has really happened until it's been recorded. What do you think the role of recording the experience of Ukrainians and the events of the war will have on writing the histories of this moment, and who can contribute to that?
Thank you for this question. I believe in the artistic circles, in the creative circles to where I also belong, the main shift which has happened within last 11 months was that we are now in the phase of documentary rather than creative mode. We are more the witnesses. We are those who try to listen and record. We are those who are trying to articulate the experience, and it is important somehow to collect it. And there are masses of archives, visual archives, sound archives, photo archives, which record and create how would you call it in English? The proof for the crimes of this war, the database of the crimes of this war. But at the same time, and it is important also that the images themselves, the photos and video shots of ruins, the dead bodies and the blood, it's violence in itself. These images probably in other circumstances would be censored, and in many ways on social platforms they could be censored still. That's why it is important that you, as people who are outside of this hot pot of the war, try to somehow make the story heard. And it's also important to create narratives. We ourselves are creating these narratives, but probably we are not connecting, linking this experience to others' experience in other continents, because we are not quite aware, or probably because of our wound, which is ongoing, because of our fresh trauma, we are not sensitive enough. How does this rhyme with other traumas, rhyme with other stories in your local contexts, in your local connections? And I was really moved and touched at the beginning of our today's meeting when one of you has been speaking about the local population and the claim to the land of Canadian tribes of the previous era. And you then mentioned that you do not recognize Crimea and Donbass as part of the Russian Federation, and you state it to be the land of Ukraine. I believe this is this interconnection which is already there. You see the injustice, you in Canada try to do something about it locally, and we in Ukraine also try to do something about it, by the way, locally now. But for me and for many of my friends, it is absolutely obvious that the fight here is not for Ukraine, not for Ukraine only. It is also a fight for whether international law could be broken so easily, whether the act of aggression of this scale could go unpunished, whether the genocide of 21st century would not be named by its name and would not be trialed properly. So because of all that, I believe we need this international network of brains, international network of talents who are ready to somehow create this narrative as a global narrative. Because we know if Ukraine will win this war, if the justice will be restored, many things around will be restored. Democracy will be better off, the humanity will be better off, and vice versa. So because of that, it's important that almost on the front line, there are international reporters from the very first days of this war, and they are brave, and they are creating their own narratives one by one. I'm astonished with the quality of reporting which is coming out from this war. But more than that, I'm astonished by the quality of reporting which comes out from Ukrainian journalists themselves, who by now are fluent in many languages, and they are part of the teams, they are part of the crew of international news agencies and best media imagined. And it is not that this voice is only generated outside of Ukraine and by non-Ukrainians. It is generated both by Ukrainians and non-Ukrainians, citizens of Ukraine and people who are coming from very far away, but they feel it is also my war, it is also my cause, and I have to do something about it.
Right. So one more question in the chat is, you spoke about culture as a source of resilience during the war. What do you think the role of culture will be after the war? Will the key to process the trauma, will it be the key to process the trauma of the war, to remember, to imagine the future? Are those efforts underway already, or is it too soon for that work? Can culture makers make culture now, or are they too involved in immediate and practical action?
Well, I believe the domain of culture is equally important as any other physical and material domain. We don't necessarily see all the work which is going on, but what I really can prove that Ukrainian culture now is as live as it was before the big war, and probably even liver, if one can say that. And it is resilient, and it is an example of resilience for many. And the interest in Ukrainian culture within Ukraine is now at its highest point. You can probably smile here and ask me, well, what was before the war? And I can say you with some ironic and said tone that before the war, many people within Ukraine were partaking in other cultures, partaking in Russian culture, partaking in global culture, partaking in Polish culture, and many others of whom they think they are better off, they are more modern, they are more fashionable, they are more prestigious, I don't know what. And it is important that, of course, there are shared values and there are shared stories, and they are not only international, they are timeless. They are important and applicable in many ways because we are human beings. But at the same time, there is something which is local only. There is something which is important because somebody was here before you and somebody will be here after you. And it is not, you are not indifferent to this fact, and you are not indifferent to the legacy, to the heritage, let's say, and you would like to create a heritage which will go on after you, which is, I believe, how the civilization actually works. So it is a good question. I believe that now the task of culture is a little bit different than it will be after the war. For example, now popular culture is more important than high culture. Culture translated through mass media is more important, and all kind of common, how do you call it, common ground is more important than subcultures, all kind of slight differences, intellectual discussions and aesthetic discussions and whatever. So as of now, we are probably a little bit simplistic, and we are trying to find ways how to outsmart the enemy and also how to outlaugh the enemy, how to find in our culture the means for survival. After the war, immediately or a couple of years after that, we will be post-traumatic culture. And the very important mean is to find within the culture how to come out of trauma with rather less score than bigger score of losses. Because we know that trauma could be overcome, and we also know from the previous big wars and previous big tragedies that not everybody will be traumatized heavily, and some will be traumatized only slightly, and some would say, or at least they will feel, we can function, we can go on. We have now the energy because the war is over, we have to rebuild everything. And when I asked my students in the first days of this big war, are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling failed because your youth will be swallowed by this big, inhumane, barbaric thing which is happening? And they said to me very plainly, Pani Iryno, no, we are happy that we are young now. It will be our life project to rebuild Ukraine and to recreate it, but to build it the second time more more human, more in tune with social justice, and don't repeat the mistakes of the previous generations. It will be better Ukraine. Don't cry about it. Don't worry about us. It will be a better Ukraine, and we will build it with our own hands. What I can say in comparison, I am the generation, the first generation of independence. I was 16 when Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine has been announced an independent country. I was even too young to partake in the vote, but definitely I will be pro-independent. But it's also true that within my generation, a lot of people abandoned academia because it was in a dire situation, very unprestigious at the time, and many people abandoned Ukraine for better economical opportunities abroad. And I am just astonished and very happy to see that this generation, which is like my children, they are ready not only to partake in rebuilding, but they say it's our lifetime project. This is exactly what we wanted to do.
Right. Well, Iryna, We'd really like to thank you for taking your time today to meet with our community and discuss this topic. We're running a couple of short on minutes, and we just want to ask the audience if there's any more, or if there's any more questions that anyone would like to ask. Just gonna give it a couple more minutes, see if there's anything.
Yeah, it's Jonathan Bordeaux. I just wanted to thank you so much for your discourse. It was really, really moving and so insightful with respect to informing us and bringing your reality, in fact, into our rather distant, cold place that it does not respond to things so immediately as we in fact feel. The analogs and the comparisons with respect to cultural genocide have for us very particular meaning, but they're also, in fact, it brings to our attention the depth of, in fact, of what constitutes a genocidal intent of Russia, in fact, in the Ukraine. I don't want to go and say much more right now, but once again, I just want to thank you so much for what you gave us, and to emphasize that what we share together in the common ground, in fact, will lead to, in fact, our using and thinking about resistance is what we should be thinking about and acting upon.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I haven't mentioned that, but Ukraine was multicultural and still is multicultural country and multi-religious. And it is probably also the hidden ingredient of the resilience, that all these people are very different, but they opted to be Ukrainians together. And because of this multi-everything, we actually were able to mobilize even more energy and even more creativity than before, because Ukrainian culture was not exclusivist since 1991. No, it was inclusive.
Is there anything final that you would like to add? All right, so I'm just going to invite Jacob and Tammy back to thank you. And for me personally, I really appreciate for you taking your time today to do this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with me today. And it is really appreciated here.
Thank you. Now just Tammy and
Thank
Jacob.
you so much, Iryna, for joining us today. Your words have been.
I just been watching Iryna. Oh, sorry.
That's
Sorry.
okay. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you for joining us today, Iryna. Your words have been so impactful, and it is so important for all of us to hear everything that you had to say, and we really, really appreciate you being here.
Very
I
much
must admit, I had no time to pay attention to the chat box. If you'd be so kind to copy the messages and to send me after the event, I will be diligently reading them. And if I need to answer something more, I will.
Of course,
Absolutely.
we can absolutely do that.
Yeah. And thank you very much to everybody who joined us today and being respectful during this presentation. We really appreciate it all. I think if we could maybe bring Teresa on now too, say a few words.
Hello, Iryna. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to just also thank your friend and colleague, Ihor Yunik at Trent University, Durham, for allowing this wonderful collaboration to happen. And also, I really enjoy working with Igor in the Journalism Creative Writing program. And to announce to everybody, Iryna is our writer in residence for 2023. So you will hear more from her giving a lecture on the war in Ukraine and a writing workshop later in the year. So please stay tuned to our digital signage here at Durham College and Trent University, Durham. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and Iryna, stay safe, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.